Mark Skaar with Vivian Campbell from Def Leppard, Dio, Whitesnake, many others. But right now we're going to talk about this fantastic new Last in Line Heavy Crown record. Vivian, how are you?
I'm very, very well. Thank you, Mark.
I'm very happy to say I bought the record, even though we get promos in the biz. I bought the record.
Very flattered.
Yes, and Heavy Crown is the name of it. What's that?
Can I tell you that I bought it too? No, seriously, because it was released last week, and I don't have a copy. I mean, I have a digital, but I wanted a physical copy. I went to Best Buy, and I found it buried on the rack behind Lil Wayne, the rapper. Yeah, seriously, it took me about 15 minutes to find it. It's no wonder the music business is in dire straits, you know.
Right, exactly. I sat down and watched the entire DVD, and I tell you, folks, if you're going to buy this, get the deluxe edition CD DVD. It's about 2 hours jam-packed. It's like a documentary, and it's fantabulous. I just love it.
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, you know, we had a lot of fun making the record. I hope that comes through in the DVD. You know.
Yeah, for sure. And
process.
And, of course, I want to talk about that. I know I've read enough interviews with you, Viv, that I know you kind of got the itch to go back toward this style when you got the call from Scott Gorham to play all those wonderful Thin Lizzy songs. I'm a huge fan myself.
Yeah, that's kind of what started it for me. That was late 2010, early 2011, and Scott called, and Def Leppard weren't active around that time, and Scott called me up and asked if I would go on tour with Lizzy for a few months as a stunt guitar player. So I jumped at the chance, and Lizzy were hugely influential to me when I was a teenage guy learning guitar. I mean, I would lock myself in my bedroom and drop the needle on Lizzy records all night. And so I was really, really familiar with the work, super fan of Scott and Brian Robertson, and it was through Thin Lizzy that I discovered Gary Moore, who went on to be my ultimate guitar hero and who I emulated the most. And so just being on stage with Scott and Brian Downey and playing the songs of my youth, just it lit that fire again, you know. So I came off of that tour, and I immediately called Vinny Appice and Jimmy Bain and said, can we just get together and play? And it had been 27 years at that stage since we had played together, and we walked into a rehearsal room, and started playing, and it was instant. Like, the chemistry was instant, just like it had always been, and we started getting goosebumps and getting all giddy like schoolboys, you know. So one thing led to another, and Vinny introduced me to Andrew Freeman.
Yep.
And Andrew came down to jam because we just felt, you know, to make it complete, we needed a singer there. And this was about a year after Ronnie had passed away. And we're just in there. Andrew comes in and starts singing, and I was just blown away because he had the pipes and the power and the passion to sing over the enormous racket that Jimmy and Vinny and I make. And but yet he didn't sound anything like Ronnie. And I just had this epiphany, this light bulb moment, you know, where I thought, here's the unmistakable sound of the original Dio band, and a singer who takes it in a different direction and has the power to do it. And that's when I suggested that we, like, right there and then, I didn't give it any thought. I just said, let's call it Last in Line and go out and do some gigs playing these songs. So, and that's what we did. We just did some local LA area shows very sporadically and very much just for fun, and that was the extent of our ambition. And, you know, one thing leads to another. Then a couple of years later, we were offered some shows in the UK and in Japan, and immediately after that, we get a call from Frontiers Records offering us a record deal if we were interested in writing and recording new music. And we honestly hadn't thought about doing that up to that stage. But we decided to take that opportunity, and we started writing songs, and it was such a great experience, as I hope the DVD shows. I mean, just the whole writing and recording and just being back together with those guys was so much fun, and it was a very organic process and very easy and just joyous.
We're talking to Vivian Campbell about Last in Line, Heavy Crown, out now on Frontiers. And, Jeff Pilson, of course, is the producer of this, and he's got some history with Ronnie as well, a little bit later on in the mid-'90s, and comes in as producer, and this thing just sounds great.
Well, thank you. Jeff was a godsend as a producer. He really brought a lot to the project. He kept things going. He's got tremendous energy. He's got great technical skills as an engineer, great musical skills and instincts as a producer. In particular with regard to Andrew, because Jeff is such a great singer himself. I think he really gets inside the head of singers and really knows how to pull out a performance. And Yeah, I can't say enough great things about Jeff and how he helped us with this record. And then the record was mixed and mastered by a guy called Chris Collier, and very talented young guy. And when we first recorded a handful of songs, we brought Chris in to listen, and we said to him, Chris, please go home and listen to the Holy Diver album about 100 times or so, and then mix these tracks. We really wanted it to have this sonic integrity of records of that era. You know, so many modern records, particularly rock records, are so heavily compressed.
Yes.
At every stage, the tracking stage, the mixing, and particularly at the mastering stage. And it to me, it makes it difficult to listen to repeatedly. There's just not a lot of sonic clarity in a lot of modern records, and I really miss that from records from the 70s and early 80s, that when people didn't do that. So we did try, I hope that comes across, but we deliberately tried to technically record the record in that way. The tracks were recorded live. We did minimal overdubs, and we really tried to lay off the compression. So, you know, hopefully it's a more of a crisp and clear production. And, you know, like I said, it was all just such an easy experience for us. And, you know, it was so fun to do. And I'm so glad we got to do it with Jimmy. You know,
right.
Unfortunately, I don't know if everyone's aware, but Jimmy passed away 5 weeks ago, right at the 11th hour, which makes the release of this record a very bittersweet experience for us, because the album was actually ready to release a year ago, and we decided to sit on it so that we would all have the opportunity to tour and promote it, because we believed in it so much. And then it's unfortunate that right at the 11th hour, Jimmy passed away. You know, and Jimmy really believed in this record so much, and really focused on it, and actually overcame his biggest demon of his life, which was his sobriety issue. And he'd been stone cold sober for the last 18 months, and very, very focused and lucid, and really invested in this project. And so it's particularly sad, you know, that he's not here to see it. But the good news is that we all feel, as Jimmy did, that it stands shoulder to shoulder with a lot of his best work. So we'll do what we can to make sure that it's heard, you know.
We're talking with Vivian Campbell, and the late Jimmy Bain. Gosh, going back to Rainbow Rising and all the work he did with you guys and everything else, and his stamp is definitely all over this. And there's just a lot of separation between all of you, and it does come through. And I know, you know, he was very integral, as were all of you, into the making of Heavy Crown.
Yeah, it's difficult to think about going forward without him. We were supposed to be on tour right now. Like I said, we'd all waited for a year to release the record so that we could tour. now Jimmy goes and throws this curveball. So we cancelled the tour out of respect to Jimmy. It just wouldn't have been right to grab some bass player and go on tour. However, we will do, there were a couple of festival shows that we were booked to do. There were highlights of the tour, and we will honour those obligations. One's in Italy in late April, and the other's in the Rocklahoma Festival at the end of May. Mm-hmm. I don't yet know who's going to play bass with us at those shows, but we'll figure that out. It'll just be a temporary thing, whatever. We really don't know what our long-term goals are going to be, and that will depend a lot on how this record is received, you know, and that will help shape our long-term plans. But it's a strange time, you know. It's only been 5 weeks since Jimmy passed away, and now the record's out, and I'm very happy to say that it's been very, very well received in terms of reviews that it's gotten, and we're encouraged by that, but it's, like I said, it's a very bittersweet experience.
I would believe that. Can we talk about some of the songs?
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, let's just start at the beginning and roll through. Devil in Me, which was the first taste for all of us, and I just knew right then and there that, oh, this is going to be good.
Well, that's one song. We didn't approach any of these songs deliberately trying to make it sound like a Dio record or anything, but again, I mean, you know, we were 75% of the early Dio band, so we do have that tonality. That was just a song, it grew out of a jam session in rehearsal with Vinny and myself. Jimmy was late, and anyone who knows Jimmy will tell you he was always late. In fact, and this is not a joke, Jimmy was late to his own funeral, because it took us a week to get his body released from the coroner's office in Miami to fly it back to L.A. So, you know, I don't mean to make light of this. I mean, Jimmy would share the joke with me, but so anyway, Jimmy was late for this rehearsal, and I I was really hoping that Jimmy would have an idea this day, because I kind of just showed up with nothing. So it was like, no, it's just me and Vinny. So I just started playing it, and the song literally just fell out. I just started playing the chords, and I thought, that sounds nice. And Vinny started laying this huge big beat, and I thought, this is good. And then the riff, I don't know where it came from, but all of a sudden my fingers fell on this riff, and then I started to get real excited. I thought, okay, this is really reminiscent of classic Dio. This is the sort of thing that Ronnie would have loved. And by the time Jimmy showed up, we had most of the parts for the song, and then we just sent an MP3 to Andrew, and Andrew came up with this terrific melody and lyric on top of it. But that's how that song kind of happened. But that's the one song to my ears. Others may disagree, but to my ears, that's the one that sounds like it wouldn't have been out of place on the Holy Diver album.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of Andrew is kind of, I've noticed that there, and maybe it's intentional, but probably not, there's references to me in some of the lyrics that go back to Ronnie's time in Dio and maybe even in Sabbath. I just thought it was a really cool coincidental thing.
It's possible, I haven't grilled Andrew too much about the lyrics. We've had a couple of conversations about what this song means or that song means, but it's very, very much his thing. I tried to give Andrew a few pointers on lyrics, just, when I came up with a couple of the riff ideas, I had a little melody idea and maybe a little lyric idea, and I'd give them to him, and unfortunately he disregarded all of them and did his own thing, So we each do our own thing best, I'll shut up and play my guitar.
Another great track is Martyr, a real burner.
Martyr's a Jimmy riff. I talked about Jimmy being sober doing this record, and Jimmy got in trouble with the law again a few years ago, not for the first time in his life, and he was having to go through court-appointed rehab while we were actually writing this record and recording a lot of it. And I used to pick him up at the halfway house. He couldn't get out before 4 p.m., and he had to be back by 10. And it was a dismal place, and the one thing that I think helped Jimmy really deal with that was the fact that he had a guitar with him, he had a bass, and he could plug into a little jam box and put headphones on and actually write riffs. And Martyr was one of the riffs that Jimmy wrote while he was in this rehab place, and it's just a great and very typical Jimmy riff, and it's one of my favorite songs in the record. And we got to play it live with him once a couple of days before he passed away at the show we did in Miami. And that was great. We got to play Devil and Star Maker and Martyr with Jimmy just one time, and it was brilliant.
Star Maker is next. There's a video for that as well. Another one of my favorite tracks.
Yes, Star Maker was very much a collaborative effort. We were kind of hung up on it for a while. And then one night, I remember in rehearsal, it happened to be one of the rehearsals or writing sessions where Andrew had flown in from Vegas to be with us, and that really helped it take its final shape. Andrew had lyric ideas and melodies and stuff, and I can't remember who exactly came up with the idea. It was either Andrew or Vinny came up with the idea of stopping and having dead air right before the chorus of the song, and that really gives it tremendous impact. It was just a wonderful suggestion, whichever one of those two guys came up with it, but it was so cool, and we thought, that's really powerful. So, and that was the night the song just really came together, but it had been hanging around for a couple of weeks before that, and we hadn't quite completed it until somebody made that suggestion.
Burn This House Down.
Again, that same night that we nailed Star Maker was the same night that Andrew was there, and we managed to knock that song into shape. It was one of several riffs that we'd kind of started and we'd put on the back burner because we kind of felt that we needed to go somewhere and we didn't know quite where. And it was only when Andrew came in and completed the equation that it actually made it obvious for us musically where we needed to go. A lot of the sessions, because Andrew had moved to Las Vegas and the rest of us were in Los Angeles, Andrew wasn't always in the room with us when we were doing writing sessions. We'd have to write and record MP3s and send them to him to work on. But again, it was the same night that we nailed Star Maker. It was the same night that we nailed that song. We didn't have a lot of sessions in all, writing or recording sessions. This entire record was done very quickly and very economically, shall we say. So we didn't have a lot of luxury of time to think about stuff, but So that's why I'm saying, like, oh yeah, we finished that song on the same night as we finished the other one. You know, a lot of it really was kind of jammed into a few hours' work.
I Am Revolution.
Again, same night. I swear that must have been a magical night. The stars were aligned, and the riff. This song goes to a halftime at the very end of the song. That's what we were playing with for the longest time. And Vinny kept saying, "No, we need faster. We've got enough of these halftime songs. We need it fast." And Andrew, who probably has more punk influence than the rest of us because he's a generation younger, he picked up my guitar and he said, "Why don't we play it like this?" And it was real real double-time thrashy, punky. And it's something that would never have happened had Andrew not made that suggestion. So we started playing it like that, and it was all like, oh yeah, this is great. And then that kind of led us to go to the breakdown verse parts where it's just bass-driven and the guitar drops out altogether. So a very different kind of a song for us. And again, hats off to Andrew for steering us in that direction.
Next is Blame It On Me.
Blame It On Me. Another Jimmy riff, actually. Jimmy actually called me up and he said, I got this idea for a riff. It's kind of big, heavy halftime, like Kashmir. We went in, we started playing it. We all immediately started throwing ideas on it. Andrew wasn't there for that one. It was just Jimmy and Vinny and myself. And I came up with the whole middle section. We needed to take it musically in a whole different direction because it's very much stuck on the root note for the entire song up to there. Ironically, it sounds more like Sabbath than like Led Zeppelin. That's probably because of Vinny, and Vinny just has that heavy Sabbath monstrous feel. And the lyric is also very, very dark, much darker, I think, than a Robert Plant lyric would have been. So that was one that we recorded and we sent it to Andrew, and we actually had recorded the track before we really knew what Andrew was going to sing on it, which was actually true of a lot of the songs in this record because of the geographical distance with Andrew being in Vegas and us being in LA. So as long as he gave us the green light to record the track to the arrangement that we had sent him, we were often recording the track without really knowing what the melody or the lyric was going to be, and Blame It On Me was one of those songs.
In Flames or Shot Down in Flames, either way.
Shot Down in Flames was actually one of the very first songs that we wrote and recorded. It was actually Vinny's idea. Now, not a lot of drummers actually write songs, and Vinny cannot play guitar, and he also cannot tell you, no, play an A chord instead of a D chord or a G chord or whatever. He doesn't. It's kind of like shooting in the dark. He'd go, no, not that note, higher, lower, no, not that one, lower still. So we kind of futzed around for a bit, and then we established what the note was that Vinny was hearing in his head. It turned out to be a D flat. So having established the first note, Vinny said, I hear this riff in my head, like den 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 den. So I worked it out on guitar, and that was it. Then Jimmy came up with the next part, the part that swings, kind of like the B section. And then this is actually one of them. I went home that night and I listened to what we'd done that day, and I had the idea for the melody and the title, Shot Down in Flames, and that was one of the ones. In fact, that was the only one I had suggested to Andrew, where he actually took part of it and worked with it, and then came up with this silk purse from a sow's ear.
Right. Already Dead.
Already Dead was, again, it was one of the pretty early ones. Very much collaborative. I'd come up with the early opening riff. Vinny suggested going to a halftime for the chorus section. It's just one of those songs. Andrew wasn't with us for that one, and I don't remember exactly how it all came together. Other than I started with this F sharp riff I had. I know Jimmy came up with the next part. It was one of those we just bounced it off, and we kind of did have a few different arrangements for that until we could actually get it to Andrew, and Andrew emailed us back and said, no, you've got to put this part ahead of that part. So we kind of went back and forth in the arrangement on that via email before we actually all signed off on it. And then again, it was one of those where we recorded blind, if you like, without knowing really exactly what Andrew was going to sing on it. And it was always a delight afterwards when Andrew did come in from Vegas for a couple of days to put the vocals on the track, to actually hear it come to life, you know, and you think, oh, that's it, that's where it's going. That's what he was hearing for this, you know.
Sure. Curse the Day, another one of my favorites.
I believe that was the very last song we wrote. We were so inept that we didn't actually read the entire recording contract, and we only originally wrote and recorded 10 songs.
Okay.
The contract actually called for 12 for the deluxe package, so we ended up having to have a last-minute writing session, and it was during that session we actually wrote Blame It On Me and Curse the Day, with Curse the Day being the very last one that we wrote. So, again, another one of those, Andrew was in Vegas. He wasn't with us when we put the song together in L.A. The riff was an idea of mine, and we cobbled together what we felt was a good arrangement, sent it to Andrew, and then when we were actually in the studio with Jeff Pilson, and this was the only time we completed the song, I guess, but we actually did it via Skype with Andrew, so we could actually see each other on the computer screen, and we were playing ideas and going back and forth on stuff, and that was pretty interesting. It was a novel way to work, and it was the only time and the only song in this record that we actually engaged in that kind of technique.
Orange Glow is next, maybe one of the more kind of modern flavor songs on the record.
Yeah, Orange Glow, again, it was a riff idea that I had, one of the early ones, one of the first ones that we wrote and recorded, and it always reminded me a lot of Thin Lizzy, for whatever reason. I'm not sure if it's reminiscent of a Lizzy song that subliminally I had in my head, but Jimmy is one of the few kind of bass players who could have played that in time with me. Jimmy and I had real simpatico when we played. We were really, really locked in together. We never, ever, ever lost sync with each other, and not many bass players could have done that with me. It was pretty straightforward sort of a song. Again, another one that we had recorded without knowing what Andrew was going to sing on it. And again, another joyous experience when you actually hear it come to life. You record the track, do a guitar solo on it, and then a couple of days later the singer comes in and actually puts a melody on it, and it's, yeah, there you go. That's how it's supposed to sound.
Yep, another coat of paint. Up next is the title track.
Yeah, it's Heavy Crown. That one was pieced together. I heard that in a totally different way. I had the musical idea, and I had an idea for a melody and a lyric. Andrew totally ignored it. I remember singing it into a dictaphone for him and saying, "Here, take that home and listen to it." And he just came up with a completely different thing, which I'm very happy to say was a million miles away from what I had suggested and 100 times better. Heavy Crown became the title track of the album just because I felt it was an appropriate title, being that I know a lot of people are going to compare this to Dio records. Sure. and to Dio, to Ronnie himself. So we've always felt that that's a heavy crown for us, a heavy mantle for us to carry. So I just felt like it was an appropriate title for the record, but the song itself lyrically relates to a personal experience in Andrew's life that goes back a few years and has absolutely nothing to do with the Dio connection or Andrew's being in this band, but I just felt it was a nice title to use for this album.
And a great way to round things up with The Sickness.
Oh, The Sickness, yeah. Vinny and Jimmy and I had been kicking around the main riff for that song, and one night in a rehearsal, Vinny suggested that we try and invert the riff that I had for the B section, the bridge section of the song. He says, "Why instead of going up on that riff, why don't you go down in it?" So again, we did one of these musical, no up a bit, no down a bit, until we came up with the right thing, and we decided we knew right when we started with that song that it was going to be the last song in the album. It just had that vibe, like the album closing song, that was going to be a long, slow fade out, and then after we were in the studio, we decided we would fade the track in as well. It just seemed appropriate to do that. I would term that song as our production piece. It's the one song that we put more overdubs on than anything else. We put some Mellotron on that Jeff played, and a lot of backward parts, and Teddy Kennedy speeches, and little snippets of Adolf Hitler speaking and stuff. It's a very eerie kind of a song. And it really lent itself to being our production number, and it was great fun to do that in the studio. We really it was one of the later things that we did, so we decided to actually have a bit of fun with it and experiment with it, and great song. I love listening to that one. I think it's a very interesting piece of music.
Sometime I'd love to have you back and talk to you about how you constructed your leads for these songs.
That might be a very short conversation.
Okay.
I don't put a lot of preparation into it, to be honest. Sometimes I do, but more often than not, I don't. I've always been a fly by the seat of the pants guitar player. The solo I did on Rainbow in the Dark was the first take, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I did it, and Ronnie said to me, he was silent for a moment after we stopped the playback, and he said, "Wow." He said, "That was amazing. Do you want to do another?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll do another." So now I'm starting to think about it. Okay, I can't start on that note because that's where I started on that first one, and I can't go there. And I'm starting to put up these mental blocks. And so the second one I did was, nowhere near as good. So Ronnie goes, "Okay, we're just going to keep the first one." But that was an example of when it works, and it worked marvelously well for the solo on Rainbow in the Dark. But then there were many, many other times when it was like I'd go in and expecting to be inspired, and it just didn't happen, and I was like, okay, now I really got to sit down and think about what I'm doing. So it's hit or miss with me,
Well, I mean, I love like the Holy Diver solo and Straight Through the Heart, whether you're doing that little thing. I don't know what it's called, but
yeah. Well, some of those were more natural, and others were more forced. That I had to sit down and think. And some of the solos on Dio Records were compiled from 3 or 4 different takes. And others weren't. I mean, others were more structured. Some were first takes. Some were 2 takes. It's just it depended on the time. When I play solos, so I'm not as weird about it as I used to be. But when we were doing the second Dio album, the actual Last in Line album,
mm-hmm.
I actually asked for them to leave the studio. I get very because it is a creative thing to me, because I'm not sure of what I'm doing. I'm actually mining for inspiration right there at the moment. I mean, I don't like to have an audience. If there's strangers in the room, I can't do it. So, and in fact, if there's anyone in the room, it makes it more inhibited for me. So I had asked Ronnie and Angelo, who was our engineer at the time, to just set me up with a track and actually go have a cup of coffee, and they did. So many of the solos, like the solo in Last in Line itself, the title track of the second Dio album, I mean, I played that when they weren't in the room. And that was one that I had to construct. I constructed that over 3 or 4 different takes. But to do that, I felt more comfortable doing it alone, But like I say, I'm less neurotic about that now. I didn't ask Jeff Pilson to leave the room when I was doing these solos. I feel a bit more comfortable with it.
And you were using 729-87537.
That is correct, yes. I bought that guitar when I was about 15.
Wow.
I had to work every weekend, every school holiday, and all summer for a year or more to pay for it, because it wasn't cheap. But that was my first real guitar. It was the only guitar I had in my first band, Sweet Savage, and it was a guitar I flew to L.A. with to write and record the Holy Diver album. It was the only guitar I had when I went on tour for Holy Diver. So it means a lot to me, and I haven't used it since the early Dio days. I put it in storage for decades, and I felt it was appropriate to bring it back out for this project. So every solo I played on this Heavy Crown album is played on 729-87537.
And it's cool because in the DVD, you talk about how you waited almost a year to get it. It wasn't the guitar you wanted, but you wanted that Les Paul because of the Thin Lizzy thing, and then you completely painted it and all that modifications that you did.
Yeah. I didn't want to wait another 6 or 8 months for a Les Paul to come in. It's not like Guitar Center where you can go in and take your pick. This was Ireland in the 70s, so little mom and pop music shop, so I decided to just take it, and then I had to heavily customize it to make it into what it was I wanted in the first place.
So real quick, your health is good?
My health is the least of my concerns, thank you. Yes, had particularly good news this week that the recent scans I just did on Monday, showed that this new drug that I'm taking is actually really starting to take effect. And so I'm one of the lucky ones as regards cancer. I mean, I know it's ongoing and I'll probably deal with it for the rest of my life, but I'm ahead of it. You know, it was diagnosed very early, and I have the resources to deal with it. You know, I've got health insurance and great doctors, and you know, when you think of people like Jimmy Bain, died of lung cancer and didn't even know he had it. You know, Jimmy's one of the unfortunate ones. So in context of that, and in relation to that, I'm very, very fortunate, and it's not something I'm concerned about.
And I see Def Leppard tour dates were released, the rescheduled ones today.
Yeah. Joe's voice, you know, he saw a couple of doctors back in January. He tried to sing through it. He tried to soldier on, and one doctor told him he could, and then he went to see a second doctor for a second opinion. The second doctor put a scope down his neck to actually see what was going on with his vocal cords, and told him that if he didn't stop, he's in danger of doing permanent damage. So that was the bad news. We had to postpone. The good news is Joe, he won't require surgery. It's just a couple of months rest that he needs. He'll be fine. So we'll be back out on those rescheduled shows in May, and then we always were scheduled to start a US tour in late June. So we'll be doing that. That'll run through October, and I don't know what will happen with Last in Line later in the year. It's possible Last in Line, we may reschedule some of our cancelled shows later in the year if there's enough interest in the record and in the band and whatnot. It just didn't feel right to do it on the heels of Jimmy's death. Certainly. Well, I hope so. I hope it happens. Hope it comes to fruition. I hope there's new music, because you guys certainly enjoyed each other's company again, and look at the fruits of your labor and Heavy Crown. It's just, I don't know if anything's going to top it for me this year, so there it is. Well, thank you, Mark. I'm very flattered. Thank you.
Absolutely, and hopefully we can stay in touch and have you back sometime.
I'd love that. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Fantastic. Vivian Campbell from Last in Line. I'm Mark Skaar.
Be well.